The only way to functionally make an income stream out of it is to rent residentially for a condo. That's it.
So that's going to flood the rental market.
Right. And it doesn't matter what they make, $100 is more than zero.
But then what that does to the rental market.
Now you see it. And if it does it to the rental market, sorry, because now we're getting to the point.
The investors are now not going to buy because the cash flow doesn't make sense, because rental values are lower, and this ripples into the resale market.
That's it. That's the one. Because every person, even if you didn't purchase in new construction, people were only being able to afford their home by virtue of the guy who's sitting in his basement, and people were sitting there and making investments for their kids and holding on to another product. Whatever it was all predicated upon people continuing to pay rental. But if the rental product continues to flood into the market and you'll just rent it out at anything, then it's going to affect all rental prices, which means that all real estate values start falling because the cap rates the cap rates may stay the same, but the NOI falls. So really interesting contagion is going to result from this as much as anything else. And again, it gives our kids who are renting product and can't get out of their parents' home a fighting chance. But it comes at all of our expense.
Welcome to Supply and Demand with Adam Nadler. This is a podcast dedicated to the real estate market in Canada, available now on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. And away we go.
All right.
Mark, thank you so much for coming on. We actually just met, so I don't know you that well. So just for the listeners, can you just introduce yourself?
Well, you knew me well enough to offer me liquor, so we're doing well already. I mean,
doing a great job.
So I'm Mark. I run a firm called Legal Closing, and we've been around for, I guess, about 3 years. Before that, I ran some other sizable firms in Ontario. We concentrate primarily on residential real estate, like so many others out there. But we've made a name for ourselves in the past little while dealing with the particularities of today's market, particularly failure to close issues, defaults, circumstances where the equity in a home is not sufficient to cover out the debts, and really all the fundamentals of a market that many of us haven't seen for about 20 years. And so we're all rediscovering these sort of skill sets that you need to operate within these market spaces. And it so happens that we've had the privilege of dealing with these things. I say privilege not because it's enjoyable to do, but just because we're very grateful for the opportunity to have had this experience, such that as we entered into market downturn, we kind of knew what to do, and we've taken a bit of a public profile in that regard as well, which is why we do shows like this. And really at this point, we're doing about 100 transactions or so a month, and we have a bevy of people. I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off my phone, which is always a good way to begin this. I'm just going to put that on silent. So the be all and end all is, we are a standard real estate transaction firm, and we focus in on today's market, and we're able to bring unique solutions to the table.
So I saw you originally on Ron Butler's podcast.
Yep.
And I listened to the whole thing while I was outside gardening. Shout out Ron Butler. He probably doesn't know who I am, but it was a good podcast, and I enjoy his channel. And you were saying some really interesting stuff, and I just felt the need to reach out to see if we could get you on here to share with our viewers on our channel what exactly has been going on, because you guys see, I guess, behind the curtain when things go bad.
Right. It's an interesting, first of all, yeah, Ron's great. He's a character, and Ron and I have been friends for years. I'm privileged to call him a friend, and certainly I was grateful to be on his show. That had a lot of efficacy, that show, actually. There's been a lot of people who thought about what we had discussed. And to be clear, it wasn't just my wisdom. It was Ron was really partaking in things and helping construct what was very interesting dialogue. But no, I mean, what we were talking about is the hole that we're now in collectively. Cycles are boom and bust, and we're currently in the midst of a bust that hasn't yet fully busted, if I'm to continue the analogy. We are in a depressive real estate cycle. No matter what your TikTok dancers are telling you, and whatever your favorite person is about buying the dip and God knows what, we really are in a seismic downturn at this point, born of excess, as most downturns kind of are. Um, there was an interesting sort of discussion that we were having, Ron and I, and I'll try to add to it because what we were talking about was the way that the condo market emerged and the bubble that presented itself. But really, and I rewatched the show, and I realized we didn't talk about the fundamental aspect that really promoted the bubble, the one that really we're trying to deal with now. And that was the federal government and their response to COVID. Because what the federal government did in response to COVID was they increased what's called the M2 money supply. And the M2 money supply is the aggregate number of dollars that are circulating in our economy. That's what the M2 money supply is. And they didn't just increase it by a little, they increased it by 25%. Canadians, when they got their hands on these dollars, did what they always do, which is they invested them in real estate. And that's exactly the time that we saw massive increases in the 905, in cottage country, in the condo market. The bubble that we had created that existed up till 2019 was put on steroids at that time. And that bubble lasted till about 2022, when instead of monetary expansion, we then entered into this circumstance where we started saying, well, hold on. The effects of this are such that everyone is getting priced out of the market. And so it was exactly at that time that we started putting in restrictive laws like the NRST and like the PPRP, which are the prohibitions on foreign investments into Canada. When we started to put in place things like the stress test, it was actually a bit before then, but so on and so forth, because we were realizing that, well, it's all well and good that, people may have access to more dollars, but what is this doing to future generations? What is this doing to our real estate pricing? And that's a factor that we all kind of experienced. And of course, the moment that the stimulus kind of went out, the moment the government stopped injecting the steroids, we found that we were at a territory that wasn't really supported by our incomes. And that's when suddenly the bottom started to fall out. And in the same way that it was a virtuous circle up, it's a virtuous circle down. The more people that feel that the market is weak, the more people that ultimately try to sell, and the desperate people have no recourse. It was the case in 2021, 2022 that if you had a power of sale, you would go to a real estate agent, you could probably speak to this, and you'd go to a real estate agent, you say, I want great deals, I want power of sales. And so the real estate agent would go, great, but what they were thinking is, oh, you're a client, not I can get you a great deal through power of sales, because power of sales, we're selling for the exact same price as anything else on the market. It would go onto MLS and that was it. But power of sales in a downward market are a very different thing. Because if there's an absence of demand, then that's when power of sales start becoming huge values, because the banks have to sell these things. And so they're able to cut $50,000 price slices every 2 weeks. And that's where you start seeing these values. So we're starting to see power of sales come back into the fore in a value creation way for people who are looking for investment. We're seeing hardship in the assignment markets. We're seeing failure rates that are approaching 30% for new build construction product that is coming to the market now. And I can go into why that is. And all of these factors are creating a market where the pain is real, the opportunities are slight, and cash is king, which is which has not been the case actually for the better part of 10 years, when you were able to invest, not predicated upon whether you can hold this, but predicated upon the exit opportunity, knowing that 2 or 3 years after your investment, you'd be able to sell it for more and significantly above whatever your loss of cash was over the course of that 3-year hold. So we're in a different market. We're in a different place. And within that market, within that place, legalclosing.ca, which is my firm, has found a niche.
There's a ton to unpack, and I kind of want to go through things one at a time. I love the way that you brought up M2 right off the bat, because the stimulus that we saw was unlike anything Canada's seen in its history,
Right.
which obviously led to a ton of inflation and the problem that we're in right now. And we pay for those dollars. Inflation is a hidden tax. There is no free lunch, right? The piper always gets paid, and we're seeing that now. The thing that I really love about your kind of perspective on this is that you see things that others don't. And so when we're talking about foreclosures, as Americans understand it, power of sale for us Canadians, um, which I actually do a lot of. So I love that you brought that up because it is something that I'm actually involved in my practice. Um, we are seeing a lot more of that. But again, it's all on MLS. We have the insight into it. We can see the numbers, and I'm a
Right.
big numbers nerd. So I track all of this and I can see it. Your insight, however, was so interesting because with Ron, you were talking about the insight that you see into the assignment market, which isn't on MLS,
Right.
which the public is not aware of. They don't see it. And you have a unique kind of looking glass that goes straight into what's happening there. Can you explain exactly what you're seeing on your end?
Totally. Let me just take umbrage with one thing you said, though, which is it actually was not unlike other periods in Canada. Other periods of Canada where we have massively increased dollars have been things like wartime. World War One, World War Two saw whole reorientations of our economy where we were throwing government dollars into massive amounts of industry. And by the way, that has netted amazing results long term. The problem we had, just I'm going to get to your question, I'm not intending to ignore it. The problem we had during COVID was not that the government was producing money. I mean, yeah, you want to pay the piper back what you borrow? Fine. If you have a more productive economy from that investment, no problem. The problem was that unlike World War One and World War Two, where we were massively investing in our industries, where we were investing in research and technologies, where we were investing in our academic institutions and the like, in this instance, we were massively investing in the passive investment called real estate, which doesn't do anything other than put cranes in the sky and doesn't leave any larger purpose. That was the problem. The problem was not that the money was created. Sometimes government creating money is actually a very good thing. In this instance, though, what they used it for was a very different purpose than the productivity of Canada. In fact, we saw our productivity massively fall during that time because we were massively invested in real estate. I just wanted to throw that out there
Right,
as
because it's a completely different scenario when our debt to GDP ratio
exactly.
is way, way higher to inject stimulus. You're injecting it into a productionless economy. Like
Exactly.
this is where you get, the money essentially falls through your fingers like sand.
Right.
You just can't actually do anything to produce a lively economy with it. And so that's kind of what ends
Precisely.
up.
Precisely. Like it's the difference between giving Bill Gates at the beginning of his career $100. I mean, would you see that as a bad investment? No, you would say, okay, like that's going to be multiplied 17 times over. We're going to have jobs that are created and everything else. So it's not that we should have a natural aversion to the government simply increasing the monetary supply. It's what we do with those dollars. And what the government chose to do with those dollars is put it right into the hands of Canadians. And Canadians were very unproductive with that money buying passive assets, not something that would substantively benefit the economy long term, the way we emerged from World War One, World War Two, and after other massive periods of spending. Anyways, that has nothing to do with the question you
No,
asked,
no, but
but
it's a really interesting point because I think the government was throwing money everywhere. Like
that's
they
right.
like they threw it right into the pockets of Canadians directly, which was quite wasteful and highly inflationary. But they also did try to give out business loans, right,
Correct.
to
The
corporations,
Shiva and sorry,
right?
the
The
60,000 and
I
yeah,
think it was 40 grand, and
I
then
think you were able to borrow 60 and then you had to pay back.
10
No,
or something.
you got to keep 20 and you had to
20,
pay back 40.
20, right. Okay. So the way in which they were just spewing money everywhere
Right.
was just a spray and pray approach, which didn't really do anything. Whereas you're saying if they had been more thoughtful and targeted with the increase in money supply, then it could have actually helped to make our economy more productive, but it didn't.
Correct. And a feature of that, by the way, is the fact that the Canadian economy is at a historic low point in its productivity. We are not a productive economy at the present time. I'm not trying to harp on Canada. I love this country. I have great
No,
hopes for
but
this country
compared to the US,
compared to the US.
per unit of production, I mean, essentially we're operating at 60 cents on the dollar.
Correct. So we had an obligation in a perfect world, of course, COVID was far from a perfect world, to use that money productively. We did not. We used it in the most inefficient way possible in simple passive investment. And now we're suffering from that because every dollar that was spent, like you said, was like sand, and a real problem. Regardless, we're now in the circumstance where, by the way, you can't totally blame the government of the day during COVID, during 2019, because that was scary. No one had any precedent, everything else. Where you can blame the government of the day, because they are certainly not blameless, was post-COVID in 2020, 2021. Once the vision became clear, once they understood, no one knew how much money to print. No one knew what it would be to have mass unemployment. No, in 2019, the fact that they authorized these loans and everything else, fine. The problem was the lack of correction. Once ultimately it was seen what was happening to the real estate markets, once we saw how Canadians were using these figures, you trust the government to ultimately take some corrective stance. They did not. And because they let it overhang for 2, 3, 4 years, just with this money supply out
Well,
there.
everybody's getting filthy rich, and it's not like the bureaucrats weren't taking part in that too.
Right. So
So,
that's the problem. The problem was not dealing with the problem because they just took a shotgun and shot and hope like hell that they hit something. I can't blame them. I don't know that I would have done differently, whatever else, but I sure would have done differently once I saw what the results of that shotgun was. Once I took the shot and once I saw blood all over the field, if you will. It's a bad analogy, but at that point, the government was mandated with fixing the mess that they themselves created, and they did not. And that's the problem that we have now been experiencing and the downturn that we experienced. Now, the place where that's most acute, getting back to your question, because this has all been a great diversion away from that,
but important.
it's important and it's interesting too, because we should know how this all kind of took place. Getting back to the question, so what happened? Well, what happened was we threw this into a bubble economy, and the easiest way to invest passively was by condo investments. Now, condo investments have a very particular life cycle insofar as they're almost a futures contract. You're able to put down on a contract, and then you wait 5 years, and then in 5 years, you get the product at the price you've agreed to pay then. So traditionally, the builders had priced in a 15 or 20% premium to what market was. And that wasn't a problem because if it had gone up 30%, you were still making 15 points. Everyone's happy. The builder made their money, you made your money, we're good to go. The builder was even happier because they withheld in the height of market certain amounts of product that the bank didn't require them to sell as a pre-sale to qualify for their loan, and they were able to sell that at the end of the process for that heightened price, meaning that they not only made the 15 bips, but they also made a further 15 bips on the market price. So everyone was happy as long as prices were going up. I say everyone, but that's actually not true because the people who were not happy were the people who didn't have a voice, and that happens to be our children because they have been progressively priced out of this market. And if housing is a basic human need as opposed to a financial asset, then these are people, our benefits came at their future expense.
And we saw that in this last election, in when you looked at the actual
100%.
polling of what people actually cared about in the different age groups. It's really
Even
interesting.
more than Trump, they cared about the lack of affordability.
Yes,
And what they were talking about
but
was
only
not
the young people.
right, because it's only the young people who, because it's been disproportionately the young people who have suffered the burden of boomer excess. Boomers have prided themselves on holding on to assets that they bought for three cherries and a nickel, and saying it's now worth 2 million bucks. They did nothing to deserve this, but what they don't realize is that this is coming at the expense of those people who are entering into the market. I'm a professor at universities. I see people who are graduating with $200,000 in debt from law schools. And then they are expected to go ahead and purchase $1 million homes. And then we wonder, well, why are you having children so late in life? And why is the marriage rates falling? And then we blame it on avocado toast. I mean, it's exceptionally, we're ensconced in a reality that isn't their reality. And that was reflected in the voting cycle that we just saw happen and that we are likely going to see continue to happen. By the way, I don't know that they're more conservative or more liberal, but I think that they are more reactionary. This system is not working for me. I think the States was as well. I think a lot of the monies that are being generated by that economy are disproportionately going to a very small sliver of people in that economy. And as a result, the vast majority of people, even if they were not voting for Trump, were voting for the screw you, this ain't working for me, let's blow it up. And it's the same thing with young people in Canada. And the prime instigator of that is housing, because that is what is fundamentally making their life unaffordable. Um, I know we're supposed to talk about real estate, but one thing I
This
think,
is real estate.
well, one thing that I found that is really interesting is the rise of real estate coincided with the decline in pricing for all basic necessities, largely through Chinese investments, but it actually assisted the rise of real estate in a substantive way that I don't know that many people have thought about. Because if you think about it, if real estate is taking on an ever bigger portion of your life and your salary, you still need a drill. You still need a ladder. You still need a TV. And the fact that consumer consumption was made cheaper through Chinese massive investment in Chinese distribution chains actually meant that real estate could go higher, could eat ever more of your income, and you could still afford your drills and your bits and your pieces and your TVs, right? In a world where your consumer products and your foods are getting ever cheaper, more and more of your salary can be devoted to real estate. So in some ways, the Chinese production machine has actually permitted this real estate bubble that has taken place in so many Western economies, because if you have more money, because you're buying the same amount of drills or whatever it is, where are you going to put it? You're going to put it into real estate. It's a fascinating sort of global dynamic at play as well.
But to dovetail what you're saying, it also loops back in on itself because now the dollars that went to China to purchase those things are now coming back into
100%.
investment here in real estate.
And then pushing up the fundamental prices of real estate. And what this does, if someone's head is now spinning and saying, I can't follow all this, all it means is real estate has become ever more unaffordable. And it's ever more unaffordable, not for those people who are in the market and are partaking in the value increase already. They could switch products. But for those people who are not in it, and that happens to be our youth, which means that we have youthful discontent predicated upon ever higher real estate prices, which does not mean we have a cohesive social order going forward. We have a real problem substantively emerging from the housing market that is causing social instability across the Western world. Actually, it's not just a Canada problem. It's evident in Australia, in New Zealand. It's evident. And by the way, they took the same they took the same steps as us a couple of years before, where they limited foreign investments and everything. We're seeing the exact same thing happen over and over and over
Which
again.
to me seemed like, it might have been a good idea had there not been so much political theater around it, where all of a sudden all the exemptions just make it meaningless. So I was looking and watching as these things were happening and thinking to myself, what are we actually doing to make housing more affordable? And is it actually going to work? Because the real estate market is largely illiquid right now, but it takes time. These issues don't get solved overnight.
Yes.
You don't just put a crane in the sky and then tomorrow you have what you need to satisfy the demand that you have currently. And when we take in as many people as we took in, increased immigration, whatever it is, the housing supply is not there.
Right.
And now the housing supply that is coming to market is not going to be sufficient because, again, it's in a liquid market. The prices will not just budge immediately. These things will happen slowly, like you said. And so right now, as you kind of put it, and I guess I'll rephrase it in different words, is like it almost seems like we're in a slow motion crash
Yes.
where like things are happening and they're tumbling, but really slowly and it's kind of scary.
And there's a couple of reasons why it's happening so slowly. I know I'm cognizant of the fact that I never really answered your question the first time, but still, let's
That's
go where the
okay.
conversation goes.
We're vibing.
There's a reason that it actually happens so slowly. First, housing is the last thing to go. You will default on your taxes, your municipal taxes. You will default on your federal taxes and provincial taxes first. You will default on your credit card. You will default on your car. And why is that? Why would you default on those things before housing? Well, for one thing, housing is happens to be where you live. There's no question about that. But also a new facet happened over the past 10 years, 15 years in real estate, where real estate became owned by more than one person. It used to be that you used to drive till you qualified, but actually what it became over the past 10, 15 years is you add people to qualify for mortgages. And as a result, you going default on a house is different than you going default on a car. Car gets repossessed. Where's the car, honey? Oh, I don't know. It's gone. Whatever. Like, and you can just answer that away. But when you default on your house, it's not you defaulting on your house. It's you. It's your wife. It may be your dad. It may be your brother. It may be your friend. And we've wrapped so many people into these singular investments that it becomes something which you will do everything you can to avoid entering into the position of I have to give up the keys. That's one of the reasons that the default rates on new construction was so low for so long as well. If you had asked me, I would have thought that new construction would have started to see higher rates of non-closure a lot earlier in the process than actually turned out to be the case.
I agree, and that's also on the power of sale side. People also don't realize how long those processes actually take.
Right,
How
right.
hard it is to actually get rid of possession. You know, these things take time to go through the courts. The bureaucracies are way overloaded, and it takes a long time for this actually to pan out. So people will wait it out, and then once they do finally default, it takes time for that process to actually happen, many months. And then you see the power sale. By the time you're seeing the power sale actually hit the market, it is usually been more than a year in the making.
That's right. The lender has tried to work something out, or assuming you've called them back to their calls, assuming you haven't put your head in the sand, and they've made a partial payment, and there's been a delay, and then of course there's been the notice of sale, and then there's been the statement of claim, and then the statement of claim maybe was defended and required summary judgment, and then you have to get your writ of possession, and we could go through the whole process, but it's an elongated process. That's right. So what spits out the back end, the MLS listing, is actually the end point of a larger process that has taken place
Mm-hmm.
for some time. There's no question about it. But the fact that we're seeing power of sales substantively arrive, the fact that we are seeing defaults of new construction, and all you asked me about that, I never really got into it, but the fact that we're seeing those approaching 25, 30%, these are the end point of people who have struggled to try to ultimately keep the things together and then failed. And so we're at a point in the economy where there's only so much give. Eventually it breaks. And that's what we're starting to see in our economy. So you asked me the question, and I promised you I was going to get back to it.
Let's
How
do
do
it.
I have any sort of insight into what's happening in the new build economy space? You called it the assignment space, but it's not only the assignment space. New construction equally isn't on MLS. MLS, the advantage of that is it's a public database, but there is no public database for builder failure, which has nothing to do with assignments. You may have just bought from a builder and then you're just not closing. Whether it's generally if you've assigned, you are closing because assignments usually take place just a couple of months in advance of a close, and so you already know what the price is. You're already in today's market and you made the decision, hey, I'm going forward.
Right.
The people who are really failing to close on assignments are not those people. Sorry, new build construction are not those people. They're the people who purchased years back and are now being forced to close. Because after all, a condo particularly takes about 5 years to reach to fruition. From the time you put up your sales center until the time you turn your key over to the purchaser, you're looking at a period of 5 years. Well, if we go back, right now it's 2025, that means that we are now at condos that sold in 2020.
Or before, because we saw massive construction delays happen in 2020 when
Right,
COVID hit.
right, exactly. That's an excellent point. But assuming that it's the same construction cycle and assuming that there's some level to this 5 year aggregate stat, then realistically, we never hit the height of the M2 money supply problem that we talked about at the beginning of this
Correct.
until 2022.
That's right.
And if that's the case, then we're going to be experiencing ever greater default rates through to 2027, because 2027 is the time when the height of the bubble pricing was factored into the agreements of purchase and sale, which height of bubble pricing has not been made up for by height of value square foot rates in the market. In fact, the opposite is true. Whereas we saw people buying product for 14, 15, 1600 a square foot in Moss Park, in 2022, we're now seeing that same product sell for 850, 900. Now, that is a huge and sizable loss. Most importantly, that's a loss that is in excess of 20%. Why does 20% matter? 20%.
Loan to value ratios.
Well, not only loan to value ratios, it's also because most builders have taken 20% deposits, meaning that's a sunk loss already for people.
Right, on the construction
On the
loans.
construction, well, yes, on the construction loans, but also just from a purchaser's perspective, if they don't close, then they lose their deposits no matter what.
Correct.
If they do close and it's 80% of the value that they paid, it still makes sense because otherwise they're going to lose the 20%. But every point below 20% is a new loss for them, given that deposits are 20%. And we've been below 20% losses for maybe a year or two at this point, which is why the assignment market went liquid. It's because people were able to give up their deposits and thus the assignments were still moving. But now, even if they give up the deposits, there's nothing there. It's still not worth it because it's 850 versus 1600. Who's going to make that deal? And as a result, people are starting to default. Now, there is no stats on this, but I do have a pretty good source, and this is what you were referring to. And I mentioned this on Ron Butler's show as well. And that source is that because I've been making a bit of a name for myself in the, oh, I can't close kind of space, I get called from a lot of people. Like, it's been now, I said on Ron's show, it's been 4 or 5. It's now probably 6 or 7 groups of people.
Now, when you say groups, do you mean builders?
Nope.
Or do you mean brokerages?
I mean brokerages that had exclusives to represent individual projects. So it is the case that when a builder chooses to sell out a condo, they usually use a single brokerage to do so. And that brokerage gets paid similar to the way normal real estate agents get paid on a per sale basis. I mean, lesser, they get paid $750, $1,000 per unit, whatever it may be, but they get paid. And of course, the reason they take that lesser amount is because they're selling out in 2020, they're selling out whole buildings of 300, 400 units in like 3 months, right? Or even less. So the builders have a provision in their contract where they're allowed to claw back the commissions because the commissions have been partially paid already.
Now explain that, because a lot of people don't know that the way that commission is paid out to agents is different in pre-construction a lot of the time than it is in resale, whereas resale, we get paid on closing.
Correct. But in new construction, you're paid out in tranches. 1% is paid now, 1% of this is paid then, another, I'm talking about on the co-op side, 2% is paid out on final closing. Or when you are dealing with builders, and if you're representing a builder, oftentimes 25 or 50% is paid out within 90 days of the deal being signed, and then the balance is paid out on final closing. Well, if they've paid that out and they have a provision in their contract that they're allowed to get it back, they're making a demand for all, after a project has closed, they know, the builders know what percentage did not close. And then they go back after these agents and say, hey, this percentage did not close. We've already paid you on the 30 or 90-day schedule. Give us back that money.
Right, and those agents got paid out 4 or 5 years ago.
Correct.
That money is long gone. A lot of these agents, and a lot of people don't understand this, that within my industry, that real estate on the resale side and on the pre-con side were largely divided. Like we saw very little overlap between the two. You saw most agents who did resale didn't do pre-con and vice versa. And so you have these pre-con agents who are set up to sell out entire floors at a time on pre-construction projects. They're doing very well. They have a team and setup that basically caters to that niche. Now those guys haven't sold any new pre-construction for the last, let's call it 2 years, or very little, right? They've been making their money on assignments while that market was liquid for the last little bit. Now they haven't really sold anything. They're basically going broke. They're sending their Mercedes back to the dealership, and now they're getting sued for clawbacks on commission that they were paid years ago.
Correct. As an aside, if ever you wanted a G-Wagon, now is the time to actually go buy one. But separate and apart from poor old real estate agents, this provides an invaluable data source, right? Like, yes, it sucks for these agents. It really does. It sucks for a lot of us. It sucks for every person who's about to lose their home. It sucks for the people who are about to lose their jobs thanks to the orange monkey down south. It sucks for all of us. But what we're talking about as people who are thinking about the industry is, well, how do we know what the stats are in this otherwise invisible area? Because there's no MLS, there's no data feeds. Well, this is a pretty good data source, isn't it? This is a pretty fine source of the builders themselves saying, hey, we want that money back. This is the percentages. And these percentages are not just coming from one, they're coming from multiple sources. So we're looking at about 25 to 30% of products that were sold in 2021, because that's roughly where we are in the cycle, that are not closing. And that has its own effect.
Well, it has a massive ripple effect. Number one, to I guess circle back to just as we were riffing on that, I mentioned construction loans. What happens when those builders have 30% default and they can't pay back the construction loan? Does that go into receivership? How does that kind of play out? We haven't really seen the the shock waves really of that whole
I
thing.
don't think you're going to see the shockwaves. And the reason
No?
for that is because, interestingly, when the market crashed in 2022, um, commercial markets immediately reevaluated land holdings at 60% loan to value. Just everyone, just boom. It was done on books, and those people who were wiped out because they were renewing their mortgage or whatever it was were just taken over by someone else. It's a more efficient, fluid market.
Interesting.
And as a result, a lot of the behind the scenes are just done. It's not like it helps you. What are you going to do? Put up massive land holdings on MLS? No, they're people who want to acquire massive land holdings are few far and in between. They're a small group. Everyone knows who they are. And if you're in distress, you go to these players, or these players arrive and they put their money up, and then the bank forces you to take it because everyone understands it has value. And if someone's going to take a haircut, these new buyers will force the haircut, and everyone is going to accept it because there's no other game in town, and you're done. So a lot of these things are happening behind the scenes. Sure, you have things like Kingset that is forcing the Van Dyke bankruptcies and the Pace Development Bank. Like, yeah, some smaller builders it's erupted into the public, but the vast majority of these haircuts are taken. People take their losses, they write them on their books, or fundamentally they kind of lick their wounds behind the scenes, and that's it. Uh,
Interesting.
but that's not the issue that's going to result from the lack of sales. The issue that's going to result is that highest and best use of built out product is always going to be rental in the absence of sale. And as a result, rental products will keep on coming to the market because no matter who it is, it doesn't matter if it's Kingset or if it's Blackstone, or if it doesn't matter who it is that is going to acquire the asset. The only way to functionally make an income stream out of it is to rent residentially for a condo. That's
Oh,
it.
so that's going to flood the rental
Right.
market.
And it doesn't matter what they make, $100 is more than zero.
But then what that does to
There
the
you go.
rental
Now you
market,
see it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
And if it does it to the rental market, sorry, because now we're getting to the
right,
point.
the investors are now not going to buy because the cash flow doesn't make sense because rental values are lower, and this ripples into the resale
That's it.
market.
That's it. That's it. That's the one. Because every person, even if you didn't purchase in new construction, people were only being able to afford their home by virtue of the guy who's sitting in his basement. And people were sitting there and making investments for their kids and holding on to another product. Whatever it was all predicated upon people continuing to pay rental. But if the rental product continues to flood into the market and you'll just rent it out at anything, then it's going to affect all rental prices, which means that all real estate values start falling because the cap rates may stay the same, but the NOI falls
Right.
on these given
Well,
items.
the cap rates will follow once the prices go
Right,
down, the cap rates
of
start
course,
going
of
up, and
course.
then, yeah.
So really interesting contagion is going to result from this as much as anything else. And again, it gives our kids who are renting product and can't get out of their parents' home a fighting chance. But it comes at all of our expense.
Now, do you think that that rebalancing which is essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about a macro level
Yes, we are.
rebalancing where a lot of people are going to get really hurt and the next generation may have a fighting chance. Do you think that that rebalancing will then rush the incentives of the government, central bankers, to which we now have as a prime minister, to cut interest rates in order to stop the collapse?
We have a problem that most people haven't. We and the United States, by the way, the United States has this big time too. We have a growing problem where, for the past 20 years, we have had an understanding of how interest rates interspace with our economy. We understand it. We haven't been in a period of stagflation. Japan was, we weren't.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most people aren't familiar with the term, but we seemingly are about to enter into a bad period of stagflation,
Now,
which
just explain
I,
stagflation and unemployment and how it all interplays so that people understand.
sure, it's where you have both inflation and unemployment.
Yes.
Because those are contrary things. Our central banks have been properly functioning where they could balance inflation and they could balance unemployment. And if you raised your interest rate, well, that would, at the end of the day, affect one and not the other. But now, seemingly both things are going to take place. This is particularly the case with tariffs, and Canada is going to be directly affected by this as
So
well.
the adverse effects of everything that we've been kind of talking about and going down the rabbit hole on is we are seeing stagflation, which unemployment is rising at the same time as inflation, and at the same time, the two, I guess, adversely correlated things that we normally don't see, which is the stock market and the bond market, are both falling at the same time as
Correct.
well, which kind of coincides with this. So we, even if we really wanted to lower interest rates, which the Bank of Canada is actively doing, and we are easing, we can't really affect the end rate for the consumer that much because the bond market is now thrown for a loop.
Correct. And the bond market, by the way, is going to undergo an even more seismic loop because it looks like the American dollar has unshored itself as it's not that it's not the reserve currency of the world, it is, but it's hanging by a tenuous grasp at this point. We saw that happen just about a month ago. This is where macro really comes in, where Trump not Trump doing his tariff thing and maintaining them caused the bond market to start saying no, 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 no. We're going to start dumping US assets in favor of European assets, of all things. German bonds. German bonds have been gaining ground massively. There isn't the same liquidity, by the way, in Germany as there is in America through the treasury market. It's not a sufficient avenue to take over, but it is where the monies were going. And it was speaking to an incoherence in government policy that was causing people to fundamentally question the American dollar. And the reason this matters is because the Canadian dollar is the American dollar. Like, we like to think we're an independent country. We aren't. Well, we're going to become an independent country now, not by choice. We're just being severed. I mean, our film industry was severed yesterday, and like just different industries are going to be severed as Trump wakes up and discovers that they exist. But what is happening is the North American currency basket is no longer seen as the same reserve that it once was. Still is, still the best in the world, still where people will put their money, but increasingly less so, and who knows what's going to happen in a year's time. That has a further deleterious effect because, if nothing else, we were always able to rely on the issuance of money, which comes from the bond market, as a final failsafe. And we knew that regardless of what was going on in our economy, we could always issue dollars because people would always buy dollars.
But it's really hard to do that when bonds are falling
Exactly.
and yields are going up.
Exactly. So, anyone who tells you that they know where they're going with interest rates is nonsensical. If you look at it only from a real estate perspective, sure, yes, interest rates are going to fall. But there are so many other things at play. Our steel and aluminum are tariffed. Our car market is in shambles. The American bond market is actually losing its efficacy as the world's reserve. BRICS is on the rise. China, there's new interplays of trading relationships. These seem like academic. Your eyes may glaze over if you don't think about these things, but this is going to all affect what we need to do from an interest rate perspective, which after all is a singular instrument that governs all. And where it was the case that real estate was the only thing that would be considered by the government for some time in the past 5, 6 years, that is not the case anymore. I don't know where interest rates go, but I do know that I don't envy a Carney. I'm very glad we have a central banker. This isn't a liberal conservative thing. I'm very glad we have a central banker who understands markets as the head of our country at the present time, because, oh my lord, I don't have a clue of where things go in the 5 year time period that is going to now present itself. I don't understand how it's going to play out. I don't have any predictions as to how it's going to play out, other than to say we still have a world of pain ahead of us as we unravel from the M2 money supply debacle that we saw take place in 2021.
Well, isn't it normally the case, I guess historically, that when things look bad, print more money? I mean, that's normally been the solution.
But printing more money for North America was a privilege. Printing more money for North America was something we could do, and everyone would say, that's fine. Like, you're cool. Like, we, America managed to print trillions, tens of trillions of dollars on the understanding that they were America, and everyone was cool with that. But you can't print money if people don't believe you globally. And the problem is that American credibility is on the line. I'm speaking about America because Canada just partakes in America's currency basket. That's it's tied in. If people don't believe you, if people don't think you should be the guardian of the world's currency reserves, then you can't print money without the effects. The Americans have been able to print money without the effects of printing money. That is the privilege of being the reserve currency of the world.
Mm-hmm.
That privilege is dissipating. And if it dissipates, hasn't dissipated, still the number one currency, but if it dissipates, we are in a different world and we're going to have to learn different rules. And I don't know that I have the financial wherewithal to be talking about what those rules are on a podcast. After all, I'm a real estate lawyer here in Toronto, focused on the real estate market, but boy, are we in a different world.
Well, I mean, that's, kind of part of the job in a sense where like I often have people ask me, what do I think? And it's so funny because, I used to be able to say with some relative, confidence before COVID that, seasonal trends would kind of see things happen in this way or that way. And it was semi-predictable,
Right.
But ever since COVID, people ask me that question and I go, I remember people were asking me in the fall, they were going, Adam, should I wait till the spring? And I was saying to them, if you had asked me that question in the fall of 2019 and said, should I wait till the spring? And I said, yeah, the spring's going to be a better market, you would have killed me, right? Spring 2020 is like the
Right.
apocalypse and not kind of like actually the apocalypse,
Right.
right? Real estate prices dropped like 50% in like 90 days. So there's not going to be any more predictability for this market. And I don't think that we have the macro wherewithal where we try to understand. It seems like me and you both kind of have at least some perspective of what's going on here, but to try to anticipate how the different asset classes are going to react to one another, where the condo market, we know what's happening there. It's a mess and it's going to continue being a mess, probably going to get worse. But how that's going to affect the rest of the market, broadly speaking, I have no clue.
I think, do you watch Prof G?
No.
All right, so Prof G does this thing on markets, and he's a podcaster, and he has this kind of wry voice, and he speaks. Yeah, I like what he has to say. I like his head. I like the way he thinks about things. I listen to him a lot, and what he says is he said something that is cynical, and yet in some ways kind of true. I think as a predictive capacity, he's like, when you're in doubt, just follow the rich. He's like, they'll always come out fine. He's like, the single detached home in Rosedale will be perfectly fine in 10 years. He's like, I'm only buying in Colorado and I'm only buying in Aspen and I'm only buying like, he's like, because I know that whatever happens, they're going to pull me through. And the condos are really the polar opposite of that approach, by the way. It's where the general public is able to invest and therefore where the pain is going to be succinct. Truthfully, when I don't know, it's not the worst advice to follow. To follow where the money is at, and try to replicate those strategies. But understanding that you don't know is definitely one of the features of this market, and it's one that real estate agents, lawyers, mortgage brokers are particularly not good at stating. After all, people kind of look at them and say, well, what should I do? One of the things I wish younger people, I've been doing this now for 25 years, but one of the things I wished I knew when I was younger is that you gain a lot of credibility when you say to someone, I don't know. Like, it's just, I don't know. Like, it's an acceptable answer. You don't need to do it so that you leave them hanging. I don't know, figure it out yourself. That's very different than I don't know, and here's why I don't know, and here's the facets that are leading into why I don't know. So here's what I'm thinking about the subject. Now you make your own decision predicated upon that knowledge. That's a very different I don't know than the helpless I don't know. But it's still an I don't know. And I think that the only thing that intelligent people can do to assist clients in this brave new world that we're entering into is actually have some humility and say, I really don't know. We're entering into a world of hurt, and how we emerge and where we emerge, because we will emerge, um, is going to be a different place than we are now.
Where do you think there is a lot of misconception in terms of the real estate market? I have a lot of, since I've been doing this, I have people in the comment section saying one thing, saying another thing. It's always different. And as many haters as I have, I actually tallied it one time because so many people just troll for the sake of trolling, which is fine. And when you're a creator or you're in front of the camera instead of behind a screen, behind a keyboard, it's a very different experience. And I'm always very cognizant of what's happening and trying to be as authentic as I can be to what I believe to be the case without being fearful of what, someone, in a dark room behind their keyboard thinks. However, I've noticed that the doom and gloom of everything always somehow ends up being some crazy opportunity for some people who are really, really wise. And in particular, I've always noticed that the people who I look up to and admire the most are always having their eye on the prize for that one silver lining, that one opportunity that's there. And you seem to be, a pretty smart guy who's pretty business savvy. What do you think that is? And
Well, I was
just
going to say that your comments were very astute there, yourself. Um, Sometimes, not often, but sometimes sacrosanct understandings have to be jettisoned in order to establish, because new realities are upon us. And I think that there's a couple of fundamental realities that, if I was young, predicated upon what I understand now, I would hope I would take to heart. One is that education is not the be all and end all of everything anymore. In fact, it's a crutch more than it's an assistance. And I'm speaking as someone who teaches down at universities. I have whatever degrees and everything else. I went through it. I was told that this is the way forward. It probably wasn't even really good for me at one point because I wasn't a particularly good student until I hit certain times in university. But everyone had to go through university. That was the way forward. And oh, Lord help you. Look at what your incomes will be if you don't go there. Well, I think that the reverse is now true. I think that those people who fundamentally go into long-term education end up in far poorer positions as a result of debt, particularly in the United States, but Canada too. And the same can be true of real estate, which is interesting because we were always told there's good debt and there's bad debt. Well, no, it might just be that there's bad debt. Perhaps renting and owning a triplex as an investment and keeping your place where you live as a rental is actually the way forward. We have to fundamentally rethink those things that our parents were always telling us create wealth. Because frankly, if you look at it in aggregate, the middle class is not getting wealthier in North America. They are not. They're getting poorer. And therefore, the very things that we were told that were going to promote growth and ultimately promote wealth are no longer doing that for the vast majority of us. We have to look differently at this world. We have to see the opportunities that exist. You go to school for 10 years, that's 10 years of debt, but it's also 10 years of missed opportunity where you could be developing out your own skill sets in the trades or anything else. Why in the world, when did we start when did we start looking at truckers and plumbers and everything else as lesser sort of things to do? These things are necessary components. They're people who work hard, who build businesses, who build sizable businesses beyond the size of any law firm or anything else. I mean, my God, we have to have a new approach to wealth creation. We have to have a new approach to the value that we place on things like education, and the way we internalize real estate as a whole needs to be something that we change. To some degree, we're not going to have a choice. We're going to have to change our approach to this because it's unaffordable. But in being unaffordable, we may actually be saving people from debt traps. And think about what you could do with money that you were going to invest in real estate. You can invest in business. You can build your, I mean, how unusual in Canada to ultimately not have someone who became rich on real estate or perhaps winning the lottery, but ultimately built a business, one that employed Canadians, one that creates a product that's desirable in the marketplace. I mean, this used to be our grandparents. This is what our grandparents engaged in. We no longer do that in Canada. They do to the States to a degree, although it's declining, but they do. It's a more vibrant economy. Our banks don't revolve around it. They don't encourage it. Our youth aren't taught to take those risks except in very measured real estate investment ways. Well, we may be able to reorient our economy around this. And to the extent that they're no longer paying the dividends that our parents promised us, you and me, and our generations, maybe it's about time that we actually recognize that.
I guess to, you know, segue from that into a more final message, because you're someone who I really do respect your opinion, and your view on things is very nuanced. And as the next generation comes into working in this marketplace, which is ever more globalizing all the time, what would be your words of advice for somebody who is, let's say, in their early 20s, just coming out of school and looking to make something of themselves?
There are a lot of countries in this world that have a year or two of national service prior to actually having people go off to college and university. I've lived in one of those countries in the past, but there are quite a few. And by the way, that used to be the way of most countries in the West as well. There's a real value in that, I believe, because it not only teaches you what the world is, but it teaches you who you are. You can believe you are who you are. You might feel that at the age of 18 you have a firm understanding of your values and everything else. You don't know shit. Excuse my Yiddish. You don't know squat because until it's tested by the world, you can't know. And it's not to in any way dismiss the strongly held beliefs an 18-year-old may have. I had many strongly held beliefs at 18, but they're different at the age of 50 because of my life experience. Availing yourself of opportunities that don't keep you sheltered and cocooned early in your life allow you to make your mistakes, allow you to develop who your person is, allow you to develop an intelligence about the world that goes beyond your years, and then allows you to make better choices once you actually choose to go to school. I went back and I did my MBA many years after I had graduated as a lawyer. Uh, I had a huge business failure where I got sued for $1.4 million for a failed building project because I didn't know what I was doing. Um, I say this with pride, by the way, because it's only through your scars that ultimately you become who you are. Um, and it was just an utter disaster. And I realized that, hey, there's a whole lot of stuff. I need humility, and I also need to learn a lot about this world that I didn't even realize I didn't know. That's what experience does. I think if I was doing it again, if I wanted to give advice to people, I would tell them that the rush to get into their professional school or their university, or to to do what it is that they've been told that they need to do their whole life, is something that, while important, I'm not trying to minimize it, is greatly augmented by a little bit more life experience. And to the extent that you can get that, even if it's just working for a year, even if it's just working in a coffee shop or what, just having that experience makes you a more complete person. And I'm going to encourage my kids, because they're almost at that age now, to try to figure out ways of getting that experience as much as they get the traditional experience that they have been told that they need to get this university and this profession and whatever it may be. Not that that's everyone's experience, but to the extent that it is, I'm going to make sure that they augment that with hopefully what is their real life experience. That's my advice. My advice is understand that the world is not what you think it is. Not to say you're off, but it's different. Go experience that world. Go develop out your opinions on your own. Ask yourself, are the opinions that I have the exact opinions my parents have? Well, then you probably haven't experienced the world yet. Not to say they need to be far off, not to say your parents are hideously askew, but you need time to develop your own mental frameworks and your own beliefs and your own experiences, and you need time to go from this perfect person to bruised and battered, someone who reconstitutes themselves in their own strength, who finds that internal crucible of fire that then drives them forward. That is the critical component of moving from adolescence to adulthood. And it's one that I wish more people thought more seriously about as they kind of tackle their early 20s and I guess, their late 20s.
That was a fantastic answer. Thank you so much for all of your time coming out here and doing this. I really do appreciate it. And just so people know how to find you, where can people find you?
Well, as I said in the last podcast, I hang out at this one coffee shop called Coco Latte, so you can usually see me sitting there drowning my sorrows in coffee. But if you're asking on the internet,
Yes.
it's it's legalclosing.ca, and anyone's welcome to call me anytime.
Thank you so much, man.
It's a real pleasure. My very best.